Richard Miller had a profound habit of observing people, not out of idle curiosity, but out of sheer professional necessity. At 36 years old, he commanded an empire of 12 upscale dining establishments scattered across the sprawling city of Chicago, each meticulously designed to offer flawless gastronomic experiences. He had learned over the course of 15 years, ever since opening his very first modest eatery on a quiet corner in Wicker Park, that the true success of a business did not merely lie in the quality of the food. It was deeply rooted in how people felt the moment they crossed the threshold, a feeling he feared he had recently lost. Sitting in his sleek corporate office situated high up in the Loop, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the bustling, freezing city below, he slowly leafed through the latest customer satisfaction reports. The recorded numbers were undeniably good, exceptional even, but something hidden between the lines deeply bothered him. There were subtle, recurring complaints about the service feeling entirely cold and mechanical, alongside high praises for the culinary dishes, but veiled criticisms regarding the lack of genuine warmth. Richard closed the heavy leather folder and leaned back in his expensive chair, staring blankly at the ceiling while questioning his life choices. He asked himself, when was the very last time he had personally walked into one of his own restaurants without being immediately recognized and catered to by a nervous staff? When was the last time he truly experienced exactly what his everyday customers experienced on a regular afternoon? The idea struck him with the force of a simple, almost obvious revelation that he could no longer ignore. He would visit his own establishments completely disguised as a common, everyday customer, without notifying his strict managers or announcing his dreaded arrival. He just wanted to walk in, quietly observe the atmosphere, and truly feel the heartbeat of his business. For the first time in several long weeks, a genuine smile crept onto Richard's stressed face, replacing his usual corporate scowl. The very next day, he woke up with a burning determination that he had not felt in a remarkably long time. He completely bypassed the perfectly pressed Italian suits hanging prominently in his vast closet, reaching instead for the neglected back corners. He pulled out a pair of faded blue jeans, a plain gray cotton shirt, and a pair of worn-out sneakers that had seen better days. Staring at his reflection in the tall mirror, the man staring back looked refreshingly ordinary, an anonymous stranger perfectly suited for his secret mission. He specifically chose the bustling Lincoln Park location for his very first undercover visit, knowing it was a moderately busy neighborhood establishment. It was neither his most famous flagship venue nor his quietest failing corner, nestled beautifully on a tranquil, tree-lined street, frequented by wealthy locals and nearby university students. Richard knew this specific location intimately, having personally overseen its grand opening exactly 3 years ago. Yet, he had never set foot inside without the entire staff standing at absolute attention. He parked his luxury vehicle 3 blocks away to avoid drawing any unwanted attention and began his walk. The late afternoon sun beat down gently, providing a rare and pleasant warmth typical of an unusually mild February day in Chicago. The ancient oak trees lining the wide sidewalks cast long, comforting shadows that danced along the brick facades of the surrounding neighborhood. Richard pushed open the heavy glass door of the restaurant and stepped inside, immediately taking in the distinct scents of roasted garlic and freshly baked bread. The spacious dining room was moderately full, with a few young couples whispering intimately near the large front windows, and a lively group of laughing friends gathered in a cozy corner booth. The modern, clean decor featured warm wooden accents and lush green plants that were meant to instantly impart a welcoming, homey atmosphere to anyone walking in. Richard stood perfectly still, right at the entrance for several long seconds, quietly waiting for someone to acknowledge his presence. He furrowed his brow in growing disappointment. His rigid corporate standards explicitly dictated that every single guest must be warmly greeted within 15 seconds of their arrival. He mentally counted 20, then 30, then 40 long seconds passing by, as he stood completely ignored by the busy staff rushing through the dining room. Finally, a young waitress hurried out from the swinging kitchen doors, skillfully balancing a large empty tray on her hip. She spotted him standing there and immediately flashed a polite, welcoming smile, although her dark eyes clearly betrayed a deep, underlying exhaustion. She appeared to be in her early 20s, her dark brown hair tied back in a neat but slightly messy bun, wearing an impeccable uniform that somehow could not hide her weariness. Despite clearly being overworked and rushing around for hours, there was a uniquely vibrant energy about her that instantly captivated Richard's undivided attention. "Good afternoon. I am so incredibly sorry for the delay in greeting you," Mary said, her voice unexpectedly soft and completely genuine. Richard gave a short, understanding nod and deliberately chose a secluded table situated near the very back of the room, right beside a large window. From this strategic vantage point, he could easily observe the entire bustling dining room without drawing any unwanted attention to himself. The young waitress closely followed him, quickly and efficiently wiping down the polished wooden table with a clean cloth before handing him a leather-bound menu. "I will go fetch a glass of ice water for you right away, sir," she promised, swiftly stepping away before Richard could even utter a single word of confirmation. Left alone, he silently observed the chaotic movement of the restaurant floor, instantly realizing that the scheduled team was severely understaffed for this time of day. He counted only 3 servers frantically rushing back and forth to attend to all the demanding tables, desperately trying to keep the frantic pace under control. Richard made a stern mental note that such a catastrophic scheduling failure should absolutely never happen in one of his premium establishments. He blankly stared at the extensive menu without actually reading a single word, as he had absolutely no intention of consuming any food today. His sole purpose for being there was simply to absorb the surrounding atmosphere, quietly test the hospitality of his employees, and see exactly how an average patron was treated. Within a few short minutes, Mary cheerfully returned with a tall glass of ice-cold water, placing it delicately on the table right in front of him. "Do you already know what you would like to order, or would you prefer a little more time to decide?" she asked with a smile that, while visibly tired, radiated absolute sincerity. Richard stared at her for a long, quiet moment, feeling a strange, unexpected urge to inexplicably prolong their brief conversation just to understand her better. "Actually," he finally replied, purposefully keeping his tone light and entirely casual, "I think I am just going to stick with this glass of water for now." He fully expected a frown, a sigh of annoyance, or a flash of blatant impatience at a customer wasting a valuable table, but her reaction was miraculously different. Instead of showing frustration, she merely tilted her head slightly to the side, looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated empathy. "Are you absolutely sure about that? It is quite chilly outside today, and you honestly look like you have had a very long, exhausting day," she offered without any hint of pressure. "I could bring you a warm bowl of our homemade potato soup, or perhaps just a cup of hot herbal tea, if you need something comforting." The kind offer was completely devoid of condescension or pity. It was merely an expression of genuine human care that caught Richard entirely off guard. "Just the water is perfectly fine," he gently insisted, closely watching her face to see if her pleasant demeanor would finally crack under his stubbornness. Mary simply nodded her head in complete understanding, showing absolutely no judgment or annoyance at his refusal to spend any actual money at her table. "That is absolutely no problem at all. If you happen to change your mind, just wave me down and I will be right here," she said warmly. She was just about to turn away to attend to her other duties when Richard suddenly spoke up, feeling compelled to stop her. "May I ask what your name is?" he inquired, watching as she turned back around with a slightly surprised but undeniably bright smile, illuminating her tired features. "My name is Mary," she replied, her posture relaxing just a fraction as she lightly crossed her arms, seemingly willing to entertain his curiosity despite the chaotic dining room. "Mary," he slowly repeated, testing the sound of the beautiful name on his tongue before asking, "And exactly how long have you been working at this restaurant?" She pondered for a brief second before answering that she had been employed there for almost 1 full year, working long shifts to make ends meet. "And do you actually enjoy the work you do here?" Richard asked directly, deeply wanting to know the honest truth about his own company's working environment. Mary hesitated for a fleeting moment, seemingly carefully weighing her words before offering a remarkably raw and honest response that lacked any corporate flattery. "I do like it, yes. The daily shifts are incredibly grueling and physically demanding. But the people who work here are good, and I really need the steady employment." Richard nodded thoughtfully, appreciating her refreshing lack of falsehood, before observing her rush off to help a distressed mother named Sarah, whose little boy had just spilled a massive cup of juice. Instead of acting burdened, Mary laughed alongside the mortified mother, quickly cleaning the sticky mess and leaving the stressed woman smiling brightly with profound relief. After sitting quietly for nearly an entire hour, simply watching Mary effortlessly spread warmth and kindness throughout the room, Richard finally decided it was time to leave. He politely motioned for her to come over, and she approached his table with the same bright, welcoming smile she had worn since the moment he arrived. "Are you heading out already?" she asked pleasantly, to which Richard nodded and formally requested the final bill for his time occupying the premium window seat. Mary glanced down at the empty glass of water resting on the wooden table, and gently shook her head, stating that he owed absolutely nothing, because water was completely free. Richard adamantly insisted on paying something, arguing that he had selfishly taken up a valuable table during a moderately busy hour without ordering any profitable food. "It really is not a problem at all," Mary replied with complete naturalness. "You only asked for water, and I am certainly not going to charge you for simply needing a place to rest." Richard stood perfectly still, his mind struggling to process the fact that she could easily have tacked on a service fee or table charge, yet she chose pure grace instead. "Thank you," he murmured, his deep voice carrying a strange emotional weight that caused Mary to tilt her head in curious wonder. He was almost at the heavy glass door when he abruptly turned back around, calling out her name one last time across the dining room floor. Mary paused her cleaning and looked at him, patiently waiting for whatever he had left to say before he disappeared back into the busy Chicago streets. "Why do you constantly do that? Why do you treat every single person in this room with such incredible attention and warmth?" he asked, genuinely baffled by her relentless optimism. Mary thought for a brief moment, lightly shrugging her shoulders, before delivering an answer that would forever alter the trajectory of his entire life. "Because I know exactly what it feels like to be treated terribly," she explained, her soft voice carrying the heavy weight of profound past sorrows. "I swore to myself a long time ago that if I ever had the chance to do things differently, I would always choose to be kind." The deeply profound yet straightforward answer echoed in Richard's mind as he silently nodded, pushed open the door, and stepped back out onto the cooling city sidewalk. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the massive skyline in brilliant shades of vibrant orange and deep purple, while his heart felt inexplicably lighter. The heavy evening traffic on the Kennedy Expressway, a daily nuisance that typically infuriated him to no end, went completely unnoticed during his long drive home. His entire mind remained firmly anchored in that cozy restaurant, replaying the profound depth in Mary's dark eyes and the quiet wisdom laced within her gentle voice. He securely parked his luxury vehicle in the underground garage and rode the silent elevator up to his expansive, multi-million-dollar penthouse overlooking the vast expanse of Lake Michigan. Decorated by a world-renowned designer, the modern apartment was utterly flawless. Yet as he stepped inside, the familiar, suffocating emptiness tightly gripped his chest once again. Over the course of the next few days, Richard strictly visited 3 other restaurants within his massive corporate network, maintaining his humble disguise at every single location. In every single establishment, he ordered nothing but a simple glass of water, and each time he encountered exactly what he had deeply feared from the very beginning. The service was perfectly correct, but completely devoid of any soul. The highly trained staff, functioned like well-oiled machines, executing protocols flawlessly, but never once making genuine eye contact. Nobody smiled with the authentic warmth that Mary effortlessly displayed, leaving Richard utterly convinced that his vast empire had fundamentally lost its crucial human touch. By Thursday morning, Richard was back in his high-rise office, attempting to focus on a towering stack of lucrative contracts, but his mind constantly drifted away. His highly efficient assistant, a bright young man named James, briskly entered the spacious room carrying yet another thick stack of monthly financial reports to review. James had worked tirelessly for the company for 3 solid years, and while Richard knew his exact job title and salary, he suddenly realized he knew absolutely nothing else. Interrupting James mid-sentence regarding their quarterly profit margins, Richard leaned forward and asked the stunned young man if he actually found any genuine happiness in his daily work. James blinked several times, clearly caught off guard by the highly unusual and deeply personal question coming from his famously cold and strictly professional boss. "It is a fantastic career opportunity, sir," James replied nervously, clearly terrified of giving the wrong answer and jeopardizing his hard-earned position within the prestigious company. "That is not what I asked you, James. I asked if you genuinely like it," Richard pressed gently, desperately hoping to finally break through the rigid corporate facade. After a long, agonizing pause, James quietly confessed that while he learned a lot, he often felt like nothing more than an easily replaceable cog in a massive, uncaring machine. That very same Thursday evening, Richard found himself aimlessly driving his car until he subconsciously parked on that familiar tree-lined street right back in Lincoln Park. It was nearly 8 o'clock at night, and the restaurant was buzzing with a lively, energetic dinner crowd seeking warmth from the chilly Chicago winds. He walked through the front doors and immediately scanned the crowded floor, his eyes instantly locking onto Mary, who was busy organizing meal tickets behind the main counter. When she finally looked up and met his gaze, her exhausted face instantly illuminated with a genuine, beautiful smile of pure recognition that made his heart violently skip a beat. "Good evening, you decided to come back," she cheerfully greeted him, her voice bubbling with an unmistakable gladness that made Richard feel strangely and wonderfully nervous. "I did indeed come back," Richard happily confirmed, politely asking if his usual quiet table near the large front window happened to be available for the night. She quickly grabbed a fresh menu and happily guided him through the crowded room, gesturing for him to take a seat while she went to fetch his customary ice water. When she returned a minute later, she playfully leaned in and asked if he was finally going to order something substantial, or if he planned to survive purely on hydration. Richard let out a rich, booming laugh, realizing with a sudden jolt that it was the very first time he had truly laughed out loud in several long months. "I think I am finally ready to take a massive risk today. What specific dish would you highly recommend for a starving man?" he curiously asked his favorite waitress. Mary thoughtfully placed a hand on her hip, slightly biting her lower lip in deep concentration as she mentally reviewed the extensive evening menu for the absolute best option. "If you are feeling truly hungry, you absolutely cannot go wrong with our classic chicken pot pie. It is the ultimate comfort food," she proudly suggested. "Is that your personal favorite?" Richard inquired, leaning forward slightly to catch every single word she spoke over the loud chatter of the busy dining room. Mary chuckled softly, a musical sound that warmed the air between them. "I rarely eat the food here, but the pot pie always strongly reminds me of my grandmother's cooking. My grandmother used to bake a similar pie when I was just a little girl, and eating it always brings back wonderful childhood memories." Hearing the profound, unmistakable tenderness in her voice whenever she mentioned her beloved family made Richard incredibly eager to learn much more about her life outside these walls. He asked if her grandmother still baked, and Mary explained that her grandmother was getting quite old, so Mary had proudly taken over the heavy cooking duties at home. Mary openly shared that her parents had been completely absent from her life, leaving her devoted grandmother to work tirelessly as a humble seamstress to provide food and shelter. "Now," Mary explained, It was finally her turn to step up and take care of the woman who had sacrificed absolutely everything to ensure she had a decent life. Because her grandmother's meager pension barely covered half of their monthly bills, Mary cheerfully worked this demanding restaurant job and constantly took on exhausting weekend catering gigs just to survive. The breathtaking casualness with which Mary discussed working double shifts and carrying such an immense financial burden left Richard sitting there in total speechless awe. He had successfully built a massive corporate empire and possessed more personal wealth than he could ever possibly spend, yet he constantly complained about his own trivial pressures. Here stood a young woman, carrying the entire heavy weight of the world upon her fragile shoulders, yet she still miraculously found the incredible strength to treat strangers with profound grace. Unable to contain his overwhelming admiration for even a second longer, Richard looked deeply into her dark eyes and firmly told her that she was an absolutely incredible human being. Mary blushed a deep shade of crimson, shyly averting her gaze as she humbly brushed off his massive compliment, insisting that anyone else would do the exact same thing. No, they absolutely would not, Richard firmly countered, his deep voice thick with absolute certainty. Most people in your incredibly difficult position would be bitter, completely exhausted, and cold toward the world. But you consciously choose to be a beacon of light. Mary remained completely silent for a long moment, visibly moved by his words, before quietly replying that if she allowed the heavy darkness to change her, the pain would permanently win. That profoundly, devastatingly simple answer utterly shattered every single defensive wall Richard had meticulously built around his guarded heart over the past 15 years of ruthless corporate climbing. He ordered the chicken pot pie, devouring every single delicious bite, while savoring the entirely novel sensation of being fully present in the moment, connected to something undeniably real. When he eventually asked for the final check, he left an astronomically generous cash tip that caused Mary's tired eyes to widen in absolute, unadulterated shock. He quickly exited the bustling restaurant into the cool Chicago night, firmly knowing that he possessed an overwhelming desire to see her far beyond the restrictive boundaries of his undercover lie. When the bright Saturday morning finally arrived, Richard woke up feeling a strange, fluttery sensation in his stomach that he had not experienced since his awkward teenage years. For the first time in many months, his digital calendar was completely clear of urgent corporate meetings, aggressive negotiations, and endless financial reviews that normally consumed his weekends. Instead of immediately opening his expensive laptop to review the weekly profit margins, he brewed a strong cup of coffee and stepped out onto his windy penthouse balcony. All he could think about was Mary, and on a sudden impulse, he logged into his company's scheduling application to secretly discover she was currently working the grueling morning shift. Without a second thought, he threw on his casual disguise and drove straight to the restaurant, walking through the glass doors precisely at 10 o'clock in the morning. The weekend atmosphere was remarkably lighter, filled with laughing families, energetic young children, and happy couples enjoying late breakfasts, a stark contrast to the stiff corporate evening crowds. Mary instantly spotted him from across the brightly lit room, playfully teasing him about becoming part of the permanent furniture, to which he happily agreed with a wide grin. He ordered a warm, freshly baked blueberry pastry and politely pleaded with her to sit down with him for just one brief minute if her busy section allowed it. Surprisingly, the floor manager allowed her a tiny break, and she gracefully slid into the wooden chair directly across from him, resting her tired hands on the polished table. They quickly fell into a remarkably easy conversation, discussing her grandmother's wildly sociable nature and how her home was constantly filled with loud laughter and neighborhood friends. Richard quietly listened in pure fascination, feeling a sharp pang of deep jealousy as he mentally compared her incredibly rich family life to his own wealthy but painfully distant upbringing. He openly confessed that he was an only child raised by functional but completely unemotional parents, leading to a profound loneliness that he had tried to endlessly bury beneath his immense financial success. As Mary listened to his rare moment of vulnerability, her dark eyes softened tremendously, and she instinctively reached her hand across the small table, gently touching his knuckles. The incredibly brief, fleeting physical contact sent a massive electrical jolt straight up Richard's arm, making him feel more alive in that single second than he had in an entire decade. Right at that exact moment, a clumsy teenage busboy nearby dropped a massive tray of dirty dishes, creating a deafening crash that silenced the entire dining room in sheer horror. Without missing a beat, Mary leaped up from her chair, rushed over to the terrified young boy, and kindly helped him clean the horrible mess without uttering a single word of scolding. Watching her relentless, unprompted kindness heavily cemented Richard's rapidly growing feelings, prompting him to recklessly ask if she would ever consider joining him for coffee outside of the restaurant. Mary froze in her tracks, visibly hesitating as she cautiously explained that she had absolutely no free time and possessed a terrible track record of being painfully disappointed by selfish men. Desperation completely took over Richard as he leaned forward, begging her to simply grant him one tiny chance to genuinely prove that he was entirely different from anyone she had ever known. After studying his intensely sincere face for a long, agonizing minute, Mary finally relented, grabbing a white paper napkin and quickly scribbling down her personal cell phone number. They joyfully agreed to meet at a cozy, independent bookstore cafe called Books and Brews, located in the heart of Logan Square at exactly 2:30 that afternoon. When the highly anticipated hour finally arrived, Richard was already nervously sitting at a corner table, his heart violently pounding against his ribcage as he obsessively checked his watch. The wooden door jingled open, and Mary stepped inside, looking absolutely breathtaking, in a simple, flowing blue dress, with her dark hair falling freely around her bare shoulders. She smiled warmly as she approached his table, apologizing for being a few minutes late, because the city bus had encountered heavy afternoon traffic along the busy avenue. They happily ordered a large slice of homemade carrot cake to share, accompanied by 2 steaming mugs of freshly brewed dark roast coffee that smelled absolutely divine. Mary enthusiastically talked about her deep passion for reading, explaining how the public library had been her only magical escape when she was a poor child, with no money for toys. She loved reading incredible biographies about ordinary people who managed to build highly meaningful lives purely out of love and purpose, rather than a greedy desire for endless financial wealth. Richard felt a massive knot form in his throat, realizing just how vastly different their core values were, yet feeling an incredibly magnetic pull toward her beautiful way of thinking. The incredible afternoon flew by in a blur of shared laughter, deep philosophical conversations, and a growing emotional intimacy that neither of them had ever truly expected to find. Eventually, Mary sadly checked the time, stating she desperately needed to leave to quickly catch a long bus ride to the wealthy northern suburbs for her evening catering gig. Richard immediately insisted on personally driving her there, and she gratefully accepted, leading to a wonderful car ride filled with terrible singing along to the local radio station. When he finally dropped her off in front of the massive mansion where she was hired to serve wealthy guests, he knew with absolute certainty that he was hopelessly in love. By the time Tuesday evening rolled around, they had happily arranged to share a quiet, intimate dinner at a rustic, family-owned diner highly recommended by Mary herself. The charming establishment was run by a sweet, 70-year-old man named Charlie, who enthusiastically greeted Mary with a massive bear hug the moment she walked through the squeaky front doors. The tiny place smelled beautifully of simmering tomato sauce and roasted garlic, buzzing with the loud, joyful noise of large neighborhood families happily sharing massive plates of steaming pasta. Richard sat across from her in a cozy red booth, looking into her shining, happy eyes, and suddenly realized with absolute dread that his massive web of lies had to end. He could absolutely no longer pretend to be a simple, struggling commoner while simultaneously planning to build a genuine, lasting future with the most honest woman he had ever met. Taking a massive, trembling breath, Richard completely dropped his joyful smile and solemnly looked her directly in the eyes, stating that he desperately needed to confess a terrible hidden truth. He slowly and painfully revealed that he was not an ordinary customer, but rather the highly wealthy chief executive officer and sole owner of the entire restaurant chain where she worked. The loud, cheerful noise of the bustling diner completely faded into deafening silence as Mary sat perfectly still, her beautiful face rapidly draining of all its vibrant, rosy color. Complete confusion rapidly morphed into utter devastation as Mary fully realized that the kind, gentle man she had been opening her heart to was actually her ultimate millionaire boss. "You completely lied to me," she whispered, her voice violently shaking with a mixture of profound sorrow and rapidly rising anger as hot tears began to heavily pool in her eyes. Richard desperately reached across the sticky table to grab her hands, frantically explaining that he had merely wanted her to truly know him as a normal man, rather than a wealthy target. But Mary snatched her hands away, feeling entirely humiliated that she had foolishly poured out her deepest financial struggles to a man who possessed more money than God himself. Without allowing him to utter another single word of justification, Mary violently grabbed her small purse, hastily pushed herself out of the narrow booth, and practically sprinted out the door. Richard was left sitting completely alone amidst the joyful crowd, his heart completely shattered into a million tiny, irreparable pieces as he realized the colossal magnitude of his stupid mistake. He spent the next 3 agonizing days trapped in a dark, suffocating depression, aimlessly wandering his massive penthouse and constantly staring at his silent phone, praying for a single text message. Finally, completely unable to bear the terrible silence any longer, he purposefully drove to his restaurant on Friday evening and patiently waited on the freezing sidewalk for her long shift to end. When Mary finally emerged through the heavy glass doors, her slumped shoulders and deeply exhausted expression made Richard's aching heart physically hurt with immense, overwhelming guilt and profound regret. He cautiously stepped into her path, keeping a respectful distance, and desperately begged her to simply listen to him for exactly 2 short minutes before walking out of his life forever. He passionately explained that knowing her had fundamentally altered his entire worldview, forcing him to brutally confront the toxic, uncaring corporate culture he had blindly built over the past 15 years. He confessed his deep, unwavering love for her, promising that if she granted him one final chance, he would spend the rest of his life proving his undeniable, absolute sincerity. To prove his profound internal transformation was completely real, Richard revealed that he had officially ordered massive, sweeping changes across his entire sprawling empire earlier that very same week. He had significantly raised the hourly wages for every single employee, implemented highly generous paid time off, and established a massive financial relief fund for workers struggling to care for sick family members. Mary's angry eyes widened in absolute shock as she slowly realized that his deep love for her had practically manifested into tangible, life-changing miracles for hundreds of struggling, hard-working families. Her tough exterior finally broke, and she softly admitted that her intense anger had stemmed from her painful fear that he secretly judged her poverty, just as everyone else always did. Wiping away her falling tears, Mary offered him a tentative, incredibly beautiful smile, agreeing to slowly start completely over, but only under the strict condition of absolute, unwavering honesty. She tenderly reached out and tightly grabbed his trembling hand, playfully pulling him down the busy sidewalk toward the nearby bus stop so he could finally meet her beloved grandmother. When they arrived at the remarkably small but wonderfully cozy apartment, Grandma Helen enthusiastically welcomed the towering millionaire with open arms and a massive slice of perfectly warm, homemade apple pie. Sitting at that tiny, scuffed kitchen table, Richard felt a profound sense of absolute belonging that no amount of corporate success or staggering wealth could ever possibly buy. As Richard sat at that small, worn kitchen table, enveloped by the rich aroma of cinnamon and the genuine laughter of two resilient women, a profound realization washed over him. He understood that a life spent accumulating wealth without nurturing human bonds is merely a well-decorated cage. The true measure of a person's legacy is not found in the vastness of their bank accounts, the prestige of their titles, or the sheer number of enterprises they command. Instead, it is measured by the warmth they bring into cold spaces, the dignity they afford to the overlooked, and the silent battles they help others fight. Society often equates success with financial triumph, yet the most enduring fortunes are forged in the quiet moments of unprompted empathy and shared vulnerability. By stripping away his corporate armor, Richard did not lose his power. He reclaimed his soul. We spend so much of our fleeting time on earth building empires of glass and steel, forgetting that the only structures capable of withstanding the trials of time are those built on foundations of unconditional love, profound humility, and the courageous choice to truly see one another.